Very good morning to all our viewers out there. Welcome to another edition of The Other Perspective, which takes place every Wednesday from 11 a.m. to 12:00 p.m. East African time. The Other Perspective is brought to you by ACFIM, a Pan-African political finance watchdog. My name is Abel Eseru, and I will be the show's host today. Before we proceed, we want to join the rest of Ugandans in paying our last respect to the country's departed Speaker of the 11th Parliament, Right Honorable Jacob Olanya, who departed us on Sunday when God called him to join our fellows who have all left us. Let's observe some few seconds of silence as we pay our last respect to the departed speaker. May his soul rest in eternal peace. So before we proceed, kindly all our viewers outside there who are listening on, following us, kindly subscribe to all our social media platforms. On Facebook, we are ACFIM. On Twitter, we are ACFIM UG. On YouTube channel, we are ACFIM Uganda. Today, we are going to be discussing about the newly created cities at Crossroads in Uganda. You know that Uganda is still stuck with the newly created cities that have failed to become functional. The Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development has failed to find resources to finance the cities, and therefore they continue to operate on the budget of municipalities. The relationship between cities and their mother districts remain nebulous. According to the laws of Uganda, a city is an equivalent of a district. In this case, it's unclear whether the city is in the district or vice versa. There is also infighting between the ministries on where the cities belong. On one hand, the Ministry of Local Government claims the cities belong to them because they created them. On the other hand, the Ministry of Land, Housing and Urban Development also claims that the cities belong to them because they are urban. But also there's also a question of the people who live in these cities. They thought that when these cities would come, they would change their lives. But there seems no change. They're not feeling any change in their lives in terms of monetary income, where they thought that the cities would come booming with very many opportunities so that they would be able to make some good money. So today in this discussion, I'll be joined by three guests, starting with Mr. Henry Muguzi, who is an electoral democracy expert, but also a passionate Ugandan who wants to see that development in the country is progressive, and we shall also be joined by an economist who will give us his economic perspective, Mr. E.A.T, whether the creation of the cities were really intended to benefit Ugandans and also drive us economically, or they were just politically created. And lastly, we shall have a youthful and an activist, Gerald Koraneza, who will bring his political science angle and try to share whether the cities really benefited the youth, because Uganda is a country which is dominated by the young people. We shall see, because most of the urban areas in these countries, in Uganda especially, are dominated by the young people. We want to see whether their lives really changed with the coming of these cities. So I will start with Henry. What did we get wrong? Why are these cities not operational till today?
Thank you, Abel. And of course, let me also add my voice to the many that have expressed their deepest condolences for the departure of one of the gallant sons of the soil, a political activist, but also a passionate nationalist who has left us and joined the long list of those who are departed. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you, Abel. I think it's important to start by tracing the genealogy, or if you like, the source and origin of these cities. We know, this is what we know, that before these cities were created, the matter was brought for discussion and approval to the cabinet meeting. That meeting was chaired by His Excellency, General Yoweri Museveni. And when the issue of cities came up, originally the technocrats had wanted to grant status only 3 cities. The first one was Jinja, because the plan was to, profile Jinja as an industrial city. So that is justifiable. Then the second one was Fort Portal, because the idea was to profile Fort Portal as a tourism city. And then the third proposal was in Mbarara. And I think that was for reasons best known to themselves. Now, but as the discussion went on, some politicians started smelling the coffee. And that coffee was political mileage. They said, wait a moment, there is political mileage here. We are headed to the 2021 general election. There is a political mileage here. We are told by those that participated in that meeting that at that level, when the debate became heated, General Museveni excused himself and left the matter to Ndugu, Dr. Ruhakana Rugunda, to chair. And as you know, Ndugu is in Ndugu. So Ndugu joined the bandwagon, and it was agreed that there is political mileage here to gain. And therefore, that list was grown to what we now come to see as 10 new cities that were created. The question you are making, you are asking, you are posing is, and these were Jinja, Mbarara, Fort Portal, Masaka, Mbale, Arua, Gulu, Hoima, Lila. So that all of these have been signposted in the books as cities. And when you go to these cities, you find that all of these are anything but cities. But what went wrong? I've been trying to understand and make research about cases or examples of cities in the world that have ever emerged as a result of political pronouncement. Until now, and I've been researching for 2 days, I have not found any. The only one I have found is called Badolite. Badolite was the hometown of Ndugu Joseph Desire Mobutu, the man who came to be known as Mobutu Sese Seko. He decided to invest all the money into Badolite, transform it from a village to a city, put up skyscrapers. Up to today, the skyscrapers notwithstanding, Badolite is a village. So cities are not just created. Cities, then it tells you something. What makes a city? There is an evolution that must happen. So what went wrong? Politics captured the process, and we have understood for the longest time that whereas politics, in all instances, when politics meets economics, politics captures economics. Politics does not only capture economics, it captures everything, including development, including plans to develop cities or transform urban centers into cities. And therefore, politics captured the good plans of technocrats. And at that moment, the process was captured and taken over by politicians. You will recall that in the original list of districts, my own Masaka was not involved, was not on the list. And so, as we recall, the Kabaka had to go and pitch camp, hold a press conference in Masaka and make strong statements that the rest of Uganda is getting district status, but his own Masaka cannot merit it. The following day, as you will recall, the Minister of Local Government had to rush to Masaka and declare Masaka a city. What Masaka? Little Masaka. My mother goes often to a place called Kabonera, and I have relatives there. So Kabonera is a division in Masaka City, and so it is called Kimanya Kabonera. But I interact with my colleagues there, my brothers, every time I go. I have never succeeded in convincing them that they are part of the city. So which city? So when politics captured these things, you would discover that as night follows day, everything now had to be re-engineered to satiate the interests of politics. And so that went wrong. Secondly, there was no analysis taken on whether the resources available in the national budget can support a city. I think the men and women who sat in that cabinet meeting that was chaired by Nduguru Gunda forgot their economics, or forgot that there is also something called the national economic implications. And therefore, until now, we cannot find the fund money to finance these cities. And they have almost become of no inconsequential. I remember my colleague Benson was telling me that his own Sorot city, there's been a drive lately where people are requesting that if it were possible, they should revert back to their municipality status, because this is not what they actually wanted. So it all went wrong when politics captured, and then the rest is history. I submit.
Thank you, Henry. Edith, now I want to bring you various scholars who have done something around urbanization do think that unplanned drive for urbanization can affect development when the necessary infrastructure is not developed and when policies are not properly implemented. You have just heard Henry talk about how politicians captured the creation of the cities. In your own view, do you think we just took up something we were not prepared for in terms of creating these cities?
Thank you, Abel, for inviting me to this conversation, and I'll try to give my own opinion about this topic. But politics aside, urbanization is a global trend, and over the years, not only in Uganda alone, we have seen many persons or many people driving from villages to urban centers, either for jobs or for better living. But what I want to mention is that there's a growing trend of urbanization world over. And we have seen that in Uganda, the urban trends have been increasing. For example, in 1991, we had about 1.7 million Ugandans in urban centers, but by 2016, we had about 7.4 million Ugandans in urban centers. That's about 20% of the population. And in 2040, we expect to have about 21 million Ugandans in urban centers. That is one. But two, urban centers are centers that are purposely created for economic growth. You shall recall that 70% of non-agricultural trade, but also 70% of non-agricultural services are found in urban centers. And generally, countries or an economy can really grow if we do not have a deliberate effort to establish urban centers. Urban centers are centers of entrepreneurship, they are centers of technological innovation, but also the centers of economic activity. Whereas, for example, would you go to an rural area and you find a person tuning in to a show like this if it were not in urban centers? Look at the technological developments that we do have countrywide. You're going to find out that most of the services are centered within urban centers. But number three, Uganda has not only a legal but a constitutional role to ensure that we purposely establish urban centers. you shall notice that our constitution, I think it's Article 179, that establishes that Parliament has a mandate to establish urban centers, but also in the Local Government Act of 1997, I think it's section 72A, we need to create centers of growth within within the community, so that we can always bring services nearer to the people. And for me, that creates a genealogy, just like Muguzi mentioned it, of why we should establish urban centers. And these urban centers, Muguzi has mentioned, they have been phased. For example, he mentioned centers that were phased for phase 1 and phase 2. But in phase 3, around July this year, 2022, we're going to have Entebbe as an urban center. But also in July 2023, we shall be having Nakasongola, we shall be having Moroto, but also Wakiso gazetted as urban centers. And for me, from the economic perspective, I really do not see reasons as to why, other factors being constant, why we should not establish urban centers, given the advantages I've mentioned. But also the challenge is that when it comes to policy and criteria of establishing these urban centers, we tend to forego certain specifics. For example, the urban development policy, it states that for an urban center to be established, you need a population of about 300,000 persons that are living within that area. And of course, most of Ugandan urban centers, or cities, I should say, in this case, fulfill that criteria, but also a population density of about 20,000 persons per square kilometer within that area, but with an integrated urban management plan for the city. Now, the challenge we have is that whereas we qualify in terms of population, in terms of coverage, we still have challenges with urban infrastructure. When we talk of urban infrastructure, most of the cities we do have fall short of that. You have seen the kind of urban roads that we do have in the cities. We have seen the kind of public transport facilities we have in the cities. You've seen the type of informal settlements that we do have and slums. We have the challenge of solid and liquid waste management problem that we do have. We've seen that type of traffic congestion that we do have. I would not have a problem to establish the cities the way they have established, but the challenge I have with management of the cities that we do have. But most importantly for me, when we are creating cities, Uganda looks at the long term. That world over, cities do not just emerge, cities develop, and there must be a deliberate attempt to ensure that a city is established. For example, a city that we think will have to grow and sustain itself in the next 50 years, the journey must be started today. Even cities that we cherish in world over, Johannesburg, London, New York, among others, they just did not emerge over time or established because they had these facilities. They had to grow. So for me, from the urban development perspective, I believe in naturalization, establishment, putting up the basic infrastructure, putting up the basic legal system and management, governance and management, ensure that these cities can get to where they are. And of course, with the growing trends in urban migration, we think that creation of more urban centers is the way to grow for economic growth, but also for engagement and establishment of services that people need. Back to you, Abel.
Abel, if I can add something on what Eddie has just submitted. When you look around, and he rightly put it, cities should be centers for economic activity. They should also be centers for innovation. So people come to these centers, the cities, to look for economic activity. If you look around cities like Johannesburg, it developed because of gold that was being mined there. So many people had gathered for employment. If you look at other cities, whether it were Tokyo, whether it is Singapore, whether it is London, these cities developed because people came for jobs. So if we wanted to grow cities and set up a trajectory of developing, evolving them, then we should have encouraged, as a matter of policy, the small, the establishment of smaller factories. Okay, factories that employ between 8 and 15 people, but many of them, which would be based on the major agricultural produce of the area. Okay, but in a situation where we don't have these, a situation where government has favored the large scale, the larger than life investors who have hoodwinked us for the largest, for the biggest part. A situation where the country, the government has decided to adopt a policy I call Chinization, because everything has been given to China because they think these are the big investors. And some of these Chinese who come are actually faces of mafias from government itself. They come hiding behind the faces of Chinese to get land and grab land. So because government has paid less attention to local artisans, investment in local factories, the people don't have anything to do. So today we have cities that are fed, that are whose residents are thriving on borders. You see, you cannot have the border economy cannot grow a city, and therefore, by virtue of the fact that you have pronounced it and let it to flow, it cannot come from heaven. So we need to have deliberate government interventions that will make sure that when people come to the city, they are able to find employment, especially in factories now, which is why, because it is in the cities where you will find malls, supermarkets, cinemas, cinema halls, all of these kinds of things, all these amenities. But if you are a border rider, where are you going to get the money? So government has to deliberately invest in encouraging local investors, smaller ones, to invest and employ 8 people, 5 people, but many of them, because this is what we've seen in other cities, whether it is London, whether it is Tokyo and so on, but also there should be affordable housing, because a situation where you find my majority of the people live outside the city, like we see in Kampala. In the evening, everybody has driven out of the city. Then what is the purpose? A city worth the name must have residents within the city that stay within the city, not these ones who, like me and Mr. Kainda and others, who drive out and come in, and we deceive ourselves that we are in Kampala city. So I think these are things that the government has to be deliberate upon. If you look at London, I was watching a discussion, I think 2 months ago. There is a protest. You know, there's been a tendency in London to construct high-rising skyscrapers, such as the ones you see in Dubai. And the people of London are saying, no, this is wrong. Because when you allow the old London houses to be broken down and allow the emergence of those skyscrapers, you're going to make accommodation very expensive in London. Then that would chase people away from London. But London must have people living in it. These are the things that the people, these politicians who sit wherever they sit and pronounce cities should consider. But when the whole thing gets to be captured by the regime survival calculus, then it loses meaning. Back to you, Abel.
Thank you, Henry. Gerald, you are a student of political science, and I know you should have studied something around decentralization and also the things of urbanization during your time at campus. We know that the creation of these cities were intended to bring about effective administration and also take the services closer to the people. That was the value add. Do you think we have any value add so far from the purposes of creating of this city in terms of service delivery, job creations? Are the youth benefiting from some of these things?
Thank you so much, Abel, for that very great question. I want to add my voice by saying that in the spirit, of course, of urbanization, creation of districts as these new districts as a hub or as a center for development. Urbanization, it is, I looked at it as in support of urbanization policy as a precursor for human and national development. So these cities, we look at them as the urban centers where the young people, these people who are within like this city, like Kampala, we see them, going back to these very areas where they usually come from to engage in productive business, in trade, like particularly the youth. Right now, we have so many youth who are within Kampala. So in the spirit of urbanization and decongesting, like, one city setting like Kampala, it is good for development. But these newly created districts, I look at them as they are created, prematurely, because number one, if you can look at the budget framework paper, the 2020-2021, they did not put them really on the national resource envelope. So the operationalization, I don't know how they planned how these districts, these newly created cities will run when they did not put them on a resource envelope. So in terms of service delivery, of course, the question that you've asked, in the spirit of decentralization, transfer of power from the higher local government or from the higher centers to the lower level, it was I look at it in a good spirit, but some of these very cities, they have
You're muted, Gerald. Unmute yourself. I think Gerald has network issues. So Henry, I want to get back to you.
I wanted to come in before Henry comes back. What we need to understand is that, like I mentioned, cities do not, establishment of a city is not an instant process. Establishment of a city is a gradual process. We're not going to light ourselves that we shall see a city grow to the level of Johannesburg or London or Dubai, just like Henry mentions. It takes time. It takes time to do that. But also, there must be a deliberate process, a deliberate intention, policy to do that. The logic is in starting. The moment you do not start, then you cannot get to the level where you want. And I want to give you specific examples. For example, in Kampala, when Jennifer Musisi was in Kampala, she tried to establish a deliberate street lighting project. And when you move on the streets of Kampala today, it's better than how she came in. Just yesterday, I was passing at Kasubi, and Kasubi is lit. You can totally see that Kasubi is different from the Kasubi we knew about 2 or 3 years ago. When you go to Bukoto, when you go to Fairway, when you go to in the middle of town, if we did not have a deliberate intention to ensure that these facilities are in place, therefore we would not have a deliberate intention of growing them. For me, I believe in a gradual process where we can have the intention brought forward, but also a plan of developing these cities in the next 10, 20, 40, 50 years. Such that, but when we wait for it to happen, in the next 50 years, we shall never get there. Therefore, let us not water down our intentions as a country, but try to be deliberate, try to support the intention so that we can always grow from one level to another level. Up to you, Abel.
I think before we go for a break, I want to bring on Edri here. Yes.
Ed raises a very interesting point, which reminded me of the history we were learning from O-level to HSC. We used to have a very good history teacher at S3. His name is Kiwanuka Kajerero. But one of the things he told us that if the colonialists had not come to disrupt the process of development in Africa, by today Africa would have been as developed as the Singapores of this world. But because someone came, interrupted our development, and then twisted our minds, then we stagnated. The point I'm making is cities grow organically. If an urban area has been growing organically, let it grow. But by you coming and pronouncing it a city and then confusing it, then you disrupt the growth. And this is what they have done. I agree that there must be a trajectory, a growth process, and sooner or later they will become cities, but they don't become cities, or you don't increase the process of them becoming cities by you making a political pronouncement. It is like a child. Those of us who support football, they tell us that if you want to win a league, and you know a league is marathon, you don't say we are winning the league after the first game of the season. You take it one game at a time, and then you win the league. So why did they not leave these municipalities to take it one game at a time? Who asked for these? And then they came and deluded everybody that you see you are becoming citizens. By the way, for some of us who come from the village, I always share with my colleagues that the day they tell you are going to go to the city, you really don't sleep. And that would be the longest night, because you can sleep for 30 minutes, you wake up, you think, oh, did they leave me behind? Or it is still night. Now, when these fellows were promised that, look, the city is coming to you, they were like, okay, Muhammad refused to go to the mountain. Now the mountain is coming to Muhammad. So they expected their lives to transform just in instant. Alas, the city came, they pronounced it, the people went to bed, they woke up, they were still the same. Today they are saying, wait a minute, what was given to us here in my own place, they call it Bianswa. So I think we agree that there has to be an organic process that should be left on its own to evolve. Because remember, cities also have to do with mindsets. The mindset has to transform slowly into the mentality of a city. In other words, if you're going to do what happened here when Idi Amin was in power, he brought the Nubis, the people from the Nubis to the city, and they occupied the flats. And in the flats, they were rearing goats in the flats. And these goats were clogging the toilet system. And before you know, the whole sewer system had blocked. Why? You see, you got the villager, you brought him to the city, but the village stayed. So they needed to leave that process to continue. That process did not continue. It was halted. I don't know how we are going to get it back on track. The people's mindsets are different. The people cannot earn. They think you just go to a city and be there. But cities thrive on economic activity. Government has not put in place economic activity. There are no plans. They have not supported local investment. They are talking about foreign investors. China is everything. Everywhere you go to China. Who told you city we are going to grow as a result of China? So I think it's important to go back on the drawing board and rethink how we evolve our urban centers. But yes, we will urbanize sooner or later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are going for a brief break, then we shall return with another edition.
Pocket.com. but the reason that's why we are here, our people need improved defense services. We at least need an ambulance at every center free.
My sub-county is the forest. We used to depend on the former MP's vehicle, but when he lost his elections, he took away his vehicle.
Of course.
So what does that mean?
Use your budget as a district to procure the ambulances.
Oh, if I could, I would. But unfortunately, government operates differently.
I'm saying, Chairperson, this is very serious and urgent.
Yes, I know. And why are they called local leaders then?
Local government.
You people, who sent you here?
I know, of course. We are concerned citizens who are watching people dying every day.
We've lost our beloved ones just because of poor health services.
Something has to be done.
You are right. Something has to be done, and very fast.
Yes.
That's transport for you. Go back.
But
All your concerns are taken care of. I will handle.
But
Have a
Chairman,
safe journey.
Thank you so much.
but this man seems to undermine our cause as to why we're here.
No, don't misunderstand me. This is just transport, no strings attached.
Chairman, we came here to discuss and find solution to our problems. But it seems you don't want to engage with us. Let's go and mobilize people, and you'll see how serious we are.
Good citizens, let us always hold our leaders accountable. Leadership is a service, not a privilege.
Contribute today at www.politicalfinanceafrica.org/donate. Together, we can contribute towards enhancing democracy as a viable system of governance in Uganda.
Welcome back from that brief break. We are discussing about the newly created cities at Crossroads in Uganda. Before we went for a break, Eddie and Henry were still giving us their insights about these cities. We do know that some of the cities were created or took effect. The creation of these cities, the 10 cities we have right now, took effect in July 2020. And we have had so far 2 financial years. From the first one was 2020, 2021, and then another one was 2021 to 2022. But all these 2 financial years never saw money being allocated to these cities that were created. So most of them were still relying on their municipal or mother district or municipalities which they were created from. So the question I want to ask you, Henry, were these cities really created for economic reasons, or this were merely political reasons? Because if you create a city and then don't allocate money for its operation, why have you created it then?
I think, thank you, Abel. You know, when you ask me such a question, you know what kind of answer you would get from me. I was explaining when I was tracing the genealogy of these cities, when I said that from the original 3, the men and women in cabinet saw political mileage to benefit from. And therefore, they were created not to develop those regions, but to profit from the political mileage. To answer your question directly, in my view, and this is my opinion, I think these cities have only tended to join the long list of patronage structures that are used by the regime to entrench itself in power. Because you see, when you create a city, you're going to have division MPs, you're going to have a city woman MP, and I tell you what, it is highly likely that it's the party in power that would have its candidates go through. Never mind that the case was different in the massacre. And therefore, you get to see that what is happening is that there was political capital to be gained. But in terms of development, there's no intent. If there was intent, why don't we have a budget allocation for these cities? If there was intent, Why do we? Because you see, even when they say that the budget is limited, why can't we reduce on the funding that we channel towards the classified Ministry of Defense budget, which now I think is reaching about 3 trillion? What about State House? There are quite a number of areas you can channel money from. Okay, but because there's one person that benefits from the numbers, because you see, when we create, the more cities you create, the more numbers you grow in parliament. I think everybody knows who stands to profit from the tyrant of numbers in parliament, because who else brings bills and amendments that these numbers are meant for. And therefore, I want to argue, and rightly so, that the creation of cities was not intended for development, but to entrench the regime in office.
Thank you, Andrew. Eddie, I want to know from your economic perspective, you as an economist, you know that sometimes cities are created to create more jobs and also make sure that people are attracted to those places so that government can be able to raise more money. Do you think?
Before it comes in, there's something I have just remembered. Because you see, you create a city, you are calling tourism city, but the allocation you are putting on tourism in the country is ridiculous. So do you really want to create Port as a tourism city? Because you see, finance must follow function. So how do you create a tourism city when you've not revised the budget for the tourism sector? How do you create India as an industrial city when you have migrated all the industries to Kampala and wherever else? So I think when you look at the actions and what was done, they don't match up. Back to you. Sorry, Eddie. I had to push that.
Eddie, I want to know from your angle as an economist, what are the implications of the creation of these cities to a country like Uganda?
You see, Abel, before we get to the implications of creating such cities, we need to know one thing, that to depart from Henry, for me, the financing of cities follows an idea, right? When we say that we have Port as a tourism city, Hoima as an oil city, I would want to position Masaka as an agricultural city, because naturally Masaka people, Vanabudu, the farmers. Mbari is an agricultural city, in my opinion. We must identify the ideas within those cities that can be nurtured, that can be explored, that can be groomed into better businesses. I mentioned when we were beginning this show that 70% of the non-agricultural goods and services and trade is in the cities, and economies grow from the cities. I can give you an example that 15% or 15 to 20% of Uganda's economy is within Kampala city. Therefore, there must be a deliberate attempt, politics aside, ensure that these cities are groomed to be self-sustainable. The challenge we are having is that apart from the politicization of the creation of cities, we have not had a deliberate attempt to ensure that management or persons or residents within the cities are empowered. And I want to, when we talk about empowerment, I don't mean giving them money, are empowered in terms of idea, are empowered in terms of strategy, are empowered in terms of outlook, to ensure that they identify and grow within themselves to organically grow the city. Because that is how a city must grow. That is how a household must grow. That is how people or businesses grow. So the implication is that we do not have adequate financing to finance these cities. Like I mentioned, we had a discussion yesterday about the same, and government is trying to cut other administrative areas and finance models that are going to go to creation of cities or operationalization of the cities, but also to operationalize other development aspects that create cities to be economic bases. right now, as we talk, most of the cities cannot grow past where they are because they cannot mobilize resources. Resources can only be mobilized if we have a strong revenue base. These cities do not have larger revenue bases other than ground rent, other than taxes and market dues. And these cannot be collected if we do not have sufficient economic activity within the cities. That is number one. Number two, cities can only develop if they attract investment that is related to what those people are producing. I don't know whether you have taken a route to Mbarara of recent. You shall find that the industrial corridor between Lyantonde and Mbarara as a city has been established to ensure that they invest into processing, generation of trade and economic activity of activities related to what is within that corridor, either in agriculture or processing or what. Now, that is what we must be following as the trend for city development. But if we say that cities are going to be developed purely based on the financing that is coming from the central government, we are not going to inch a step further than that. But also, as we move towards improving these cities, there are other issues we must look at. For example, number one, job creation. You're not going to grow a city if you do not deliberately target job creation. Recent statistics show that 40% of the persons that are living in urban areas are earning less than $30,000. $30. $30 means that a person is earning about 100,000 Ugandan shillings. This person has to move, this person has to eat, this person has fees to pay, among others. You cannot grow a city with that type of population. Look at increase in income. People do not have sufficient disposable income, and most of the persons that are living in cities are living on what we call automated income. Automated income means that whether you earn or do not earn, you must live. That is why we're having a lot of criminal rates increasing, because people must live, but they're not earning, so they must look for what other alternatives, whether legal or legal, that we must live on and grow our city or grow our lives within the cities. Look at issues of infrastructure development. Urban cities, Kampala, Hoima, Soroti, we have a lot of informal settlements, because even when these cities are supposed to have infrastructure plans that are deliberate to having upscale structures or planned structures, the financial wherewithal of the persons that are living in those cities cannot afford to have that kind. Therefore, we're having a lot of unplanned informal settlements. For me, from the economic perspective, this should be the concerns of the persons that are managing these cities. Infrastructure, the roads. Look at our roads. Look at the congestion. Uganda is losing over 30% of the economic resources we're supposed to have as an economy in traffic jams. An average Ugandan in Kampala, for example, today spends 6 hours in a jam, 3 in the morning, 3 in the evening, meaning that the hours you have to leave to work, physical working in office, are less than the hours you spend in a jam. And there's no city that can develop in that kind of manner. Therefore, let us try to look at issues that must kind of complement the original policy of establishing these cities in order for us to have economically sustainable cities. Secondly, let us try to ensure that we grow the revenue basis of the cities, such that cities can organically generate revenue, mobilize resources within themselves to ensure that some of the things that cannot be financed by the central government can be financed locally by the city administration. Today, when you look at most of the urban cities and including local governments, they contribute less than 1% of the monies that they're supposed to be using for the cities. When you look at the 148 billion shillings that has been set aside for operationalized cities this year, it means that those cities have contributed less than 1% of that money. Now, you cannot in any circumstances develop such a city like that. Let us put politics aside, just like Henry mentioned. And then we identify economic activities, technological advancements, entrepreneurship potential within the cities, and be able to power our cities where we want them to be. Back to you, Abel.
Thank you, Eddie. I don't know whether Gerald is back. Gerald, are you on? I think Gerald is not yet on. Henry, in 1983, Obote constructed hospitals, and most of the hospitals were being constructed in the forests and in the localities where people were not residing. Can we vindicate? And after the construction of those hospitals, people decided to relocate and started staying there. Is it okay for us to say it straight that Museveni should be vindicated as a futuristic leader based on Obote's model, whereby in the nearby future, the cities that have been created will really become actual cities, and we shall remember that, yes, Museveni started the idea, and we have been growing gradually, and we can now call those areas real cities. What is your
Thank
take
you,
on it?
Abel. Of course, by pronouncing those urban centers cities, there is a sense in which there are positives to draw from. Of course, you mentioned Obote. I was told through as a researcher that 1982-83, when Obote was constructing those structures that came to be renowned as Obote hospitals, and you remember, and there were quite a number of them. You have one in Itojo. For those of you who take the cavalry route, you have one in Kiliandongo. You have one in Abimda. There are about 10. And those hospitals look alike. And when he was constructing them, the places where he constructed them were bushes and forests. So one person put him to task and asked him, Mr. President, why are you constructing hospitals in bushes and forests where there are no people? Are they going to serve animals? And then Obote's answer was, wait. When I have put those hospitals there, the people shall come and be near. So the same could apply here, and we say, by pronouncing the decision to pronounce them cities may be vindicated 20, 30 years from today and say that the general was futuristic. But that said, I want to respond to a comment. There is a comment that was posted there by Ika Lino, and his question was, on what model are these cities developed?
What are the governance modalities of these cities?
Modalities? Are we using governance modalities of local government, or are we using KCCA? And of course, this also bodes well with what Ed was the point he was making about traffic jams. The reason we have traffic jam is that Kampala is an abnormal situation. Normally in the cities, about half of the people working in it should live in it. In other words, if I am working on Loom Street, I should be sleeping on William Street, because this is how cities are. But a situation where everybody must migrate and out of the city and then come back, and then that's what creates the jams. Otherwise, there are no cars in Kampala compared to populations. There is no population in Kampala. Lagos alone has 12 million people staying in it. Kampala has about 500 only. What is this you're talking about on jams? These are abnormal. So so the model should be that those cities should allow people to sleep in them, so that the issue of Kampala doesn't arise, but also the issue of governance. We do know that there is infighting between the Ministry of Local Government, which created these cities, and the Ministry of Housing, Lands and the Urban Development. Apparently, upon pronouncing these cities, and remember the Honorable Raphael Majezi went around announcing these good news, then the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development said, wait a minute, are you not trading on a territory that is not yours? And when they said which one, they said, you see, if you look at our name, our title is Housing and Urban Development. So if those cities are urban centers, those are ours. So now there's pulling over ropes. Local government is saying these were created under the auspices of the Local Government Act. The Ministry of Urban Development says, look, these are urban centers, they are ours. So we don't even know which one is the parent ministry. The other thing, Abel, I wanted to bring to the attention of our viewers is that there's also another confusion between which one is in which one. Because you have a city, the Local Government Act Section 4 says that a city shall be an equivalent of a district. So you go to my Masaka district and you create Masaka City. So is Masaka City in Masaka district, or it is Masaka district that is in Masaka City? So these confusions are some of the things that have to be ironed out. And of course, these are a concomitant of a situation where politics captures the decision-making process. Because if it were policymakers that had championed this, then all these things would have been foreseen. And therefore, also the model on which we should run this is not clear. The governance systems are not clear. Everything remains as nebulous as the hanging gardens of Babylon, because nobody knows where they were hanging from. Back to you, Abel.
Thank you, Henry. We are running out of time, so I want us to use the remaining 4 minutes to give our parting shots, especially in terms of what word of encouragement do you send to some of the people who are living in these created cities, because some of them are now feeling very depressed that they thought the cities were going to come with a lot of improvement in terms of service delivery and also job creation, but they are yet to see that. So what words of encouragement do we give to such people? I'll start with you, Eddie.
Thank you, Abel. For me, I want to be futuristic, and I strongly encourage that we put politics aside and try to find a convergence between economics and politics in the establishment, management, and running of these cities. And we ought to fix the most important issues that there is in these cities, starting with the issue of how do we work out with the informal settlements and slums that we do have in the urban areas. Look at Kampala and look at Kaguguve, look at Chivuli, look at Bwaise. How do we get out of such a kind of a thing? What approaches can we use to ensure that we are better off than that? Look at that solid and liquid waste management. When you go to most of these slums, that when it rains, most of the solid is turned into liquid, and the whole place is pathetic. You can never step a foot in such kind of places if you are weak-hearted. When look at the degradation of the urban filters. Look at what is happening to Luvigi. Look at what is happening to most of these urban water filters. They have been degraded. How do we get better than that? Look at the weak economy post-COVID-19. How can we address the bad infrastructure in terms of roads and urban housing? We have a housing deficit of over 100,000 households within Kampala urban area alone. What about other cities? How do we look at the coordinated management and the administration of the cities? Using Kampala as an example, we have a very strong controversy between the KCCA, but also within the central government. Who is managing what? How can we solve the public transport challenge that we do have? So for me, I think let us try to identify better means of financing of the cities, including genetic or indigenous identification of funding models within urban centers, within the cities themselves, but also reduce the cost of administration of these cities. I can assure you that the cost of administering these cities is much more than the revenue we are collecting from these cities. So how can we reverse that and become more efficient and more budget realistic? But lastly, how do we solve the nature of the minimalist kind of living standards of the persons, because people are not happy within the urban centers. We have land conflicts within our urban centers. Most of these pieces of land are contestable. The one inch are being sent away from where they're staying. How do we have urban centers that do not have a specific land tenure system that promotes the development of the urban centers? For me, these are the issues we should be handling at futuristic level to ensure that we support government in ensuring that these urban cities can be better places to live in 10, 20, 30 years to come. Thank you, Abel.
Thank you, Eddie. Henry, your parting shot?
Thank you very much, Abel. I think my parting shot is going to be that we need to overcome the one thing that has remained as an Achilles heel for the government in power, and that is planning. Up to today, 2 years down the road, in my own Masaka city, Carbonera is not planned. There is no physical plan on the ground. There's a good friend of mine who comes from Chanjale. There's nothing on the ground to presuppose there is a city or even a plan that a road or street will pass here. I think we have to start with the planning, but this is very important. Let the plan be in place. Number two, I think government has to understand that they must invest in infrastructure, the public goods. This is the responsibility of government, that every city has these. When you look at the parish development model, do you see any embedment? Do you see an embodiment of the difference between villages, municipalities, and cities? Why did they not embed a component that is specific to the cities? Because you cannot have a city without economic activity. You cannot sustain a city on a border economy. That will be deceiving yourselves. And lastly, the whole notion of garbage collection. These local governments and the cities have to be helped. You have a city like Soroti that cannot even collect garbage. What kind of cities are these? Are we deluded or are we dreaming? So I think these are some of the things we need to, these are the hard questions that the regime must be asked. Because you created these, nobody demanded for these cities, you created them, then you must go the distance of ensuring that you do what is supposed to be done because it moves with the territory. I thank you, Abel.
Thank you, Henry, Eddie, for your views. We come to the closure of today's Other Perspective, which is always brought to you by ACFIM, a political finance watchdog. It has been me, Abel Esero, your host. Let's keep on with the discussion on our social media platforms. On Facebook, we are ACFIM. On YouTube, it's ACFIM Uganda. On Twitter, it's ACFIM UG. Keep sending your responses. Keep sending your submissions. We shall be responding to them via our social media pages. Thank you. Let's keep in touch again. Let's be there again next week on Wednesday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. East African time. Same time, same day. Goodbye.